The bear was close enough to smell. Dust kicked up behind its legs in thunderous bursts, ears pinned flat, mouth open wide, the kind of wide that showed not just teeth but jaw hinge like a bear that didn't care if it died, so long as it took something with it. Eli Cole didn't move, not a muscle. The sun hit the top of his hat brim. His left thumb rested steady against the side of the rifle stock, his right shoulder relaxed like he'd done this 100 times before. The truth was, he hadn't done it even once in front of anyone. Until now. The other ranch hands had scattered. One dropped his hat as he sprinted for the ridge. Another tripped in the rush, fell hard, and didn't get back up, just stayed there, eyes wide, half covered in prairie grass. No one yelled for Eli to move. No one dared break whatever moment this was. Because they all saw what was happening. Eli had chosen to stand. He lowered the barrel slightly, tilted his cheek against the stock. The bear roared. Again, louder this time, like it meant to fill the whole field with its hate. 40 yards. 30. Eli exhaled slow. Not in fear, in calculation. He could hear the deep thud of its paws like drum beats in dry dirt. Could see the flecks of saliva fly from its jaws with every breath. Time didn't slow, it stretched. And then the shot. It didn't echo like others. It cracked like the split of dry bone under boot. The rifle jumped only slightly in Eli's hands. No recoil flinch, no desperate second shot, just the steady recoil of a man who knew exactly how much to give. The bear dropped mid-stride, collapsed into the ground like a sack of soaked grain forward, heavy, final. Silence followed, the kind where even the wind seems to back off for a minute to see what happened. Eli didn't move. He stood there, eyes still on the dust settling around the carcass. Finally he worked the lever, ejected the shell, and let it clink into the dry grass. Then he turned and walked back toward the barn without a word. The men didn't follow. Not yet. They stayed where they were, watching the blood soak slowly into the earth around the bear's fur. It hadn't been a lucky shot. Everyone knew that. The angle, the timing, it was surgical, intentional. The kind of shot no one made under pressure, unless they'd practiced something the rest of them didn't understand. Word spread faster than dust on the plains, about the cowboy who stood his ground, about the bear that never reached him, about a shot that looked too easy to be real. And most of all, about Eli Cole, the quiet man with a trick no one could explain. They all wanted to know how he did it, but Eli had already decided he wasn't going to tell them. The first time Eli saw a man die, he was just a boy. 12 years old, crouched behind a cluster of mesquite brush, with a mouthful of dust and fear thick in his throat. His older brother, Isaac, stood maybe 30 feet ahead, rifle drawn, jaw clenched, scanning the tree line where something had been circling their camp since dawn. Eli remembered the sound of it more than anything, the low huff of breath, like a furnace behind a curtain. And then, out of nowhere, it came. The bear hit Isaac like a boulder tossed by God. No roar, just power. A blur of brown muscle and claws that slammed into him and knocked the rifle clean from his hands. Isaac yelled, not in pain, not yet just the kind of yell you make when your body knows it's already too late. Eli didn't run. He couldn't. His legs weren't his. His hands dug into the dirt, eyes locked on the chaos unfolding 10 feet away. He remembered the sound of Isaac's boots dragging in the dirt, the tearing, the stillness, after. When it was over, the bear stood there panting, steam curling from its mouth in the cold morning light. Then it turned and walked away, like it had finished a job. Eli didn't scream, didn't cry. He just crawled forward, past the rifle, past the crushed bedrolls and the overturned coffee tin, and laid beside his brother's body. Isaac's eyes were still open, but there was nothing behind them. The men who came later said it wasn't Eli's fault. They said Isaac had startled the bear. They said you can't predict animals like that. But Eli didn't believe any of it. He'd seen the way the bear moved straight, fast, low to the ground, like a bullet with breath. And he'd seen how slow Isaac had been to shoulder the rifle, how he'd hesitated just a second too long. That second had killed him. From that moment on, Eli thought about nothing else. Not about vengeance. He wasn't wired like that. He didn't hate the bear. He hated not understanding, not being ready. He spent the next 4 years doing chores with a rifle slung over his back, not because he needed it, but because it needed to be part of him. When other boys were chasing horses or sneaking into dances, Eli was walking the ridgeline at dusk, watching shadows, timing footsteps, studying movement like a hunter without a weapon. By the time he turned 17, he could tell what kind of animal was stalking you just by how the birds reacted. He knew when a branch snap meant deer and when it meant something worse. But more than anything, he replayed that day, the charge, the angle, the moment Isaac froze. And every time he closed his eyes, Eli didn't see his brother's death, he saw his own hesitation. That was what he swore to erase, forever. Eli never said much about what he was working toward, but everyone around him could see it taking shape. He was quiet even by cowboy standards, and most nights while the others played cards or swapped stories around the fire, Eli sat apart, oiling the same rifle over and over. He treated it like something alive, not a tool, not a weapon, a partner. Every screw and sight adjustment mattered, because in his mind, it wasn't the bullet that killed it, was the rhythm between the man and the metal. He learned that rhythm in pieces, in the silence between breaths, in the way your heartbeat feels against your trigger finger after a long ride. He experimented constantly. Some nights he'd balance the rifle across his knees and stare down the barrel at a lantern flame, practicing how long he could hold aim without his sight drifting off the glow. Other nights, he'd walk out into the dark and listen to his boots crunch on dry soil, training his breathing so steady he could pull the trigger between steps without changing pace. The rifle itself was a Winchester he'd bought used from a trapper passing through Dodge. The stock was scarred and dull, the metal dulled by years of neglect. Eli stripped it to bare wood, sanded every inch smooth, and rebalanced the weight with a small lead insert hidden under the butt plate. When he shouldered it again, it sat different closer to his center of gravity, like it belonged there all along. The others mocked him for wasting time on a pretty gun. They didn't know he wasn't trying to make it pretty, he was trying to make it predictable. Eli discovered that when you fire under fear, your hands forget things. They tighten too early. The shoulder stiffens, the eyes blink before the shot. He wanted to erase those reactions before they ever happened, so he practiced until the motion became smaller than thought. He'd raise the rifle, exhale, and feel the trigger break without conscious command. He called it letting the shot happen, though no one knew what he meant. It sounded like the kind of thing an old preacher might say, and maybe that was part of it. Weeks turned to months. He'd test himself by shooting at thrown cans, then at prairie chickens darting low through grass, tracking them by instinct more than sight. The trick wasn't speed, it was stillness. The men at the ranch started noticing that even when a rattler startled a horse nearby, Eli didn't flinch. His hands stayed calm. His breathing stayed slow. One evening, when a thunderstorm rolled in fast over the plains, lightning cracked near the corral and sent the cattle thrashing. The younger cowhands panicked, trying to corral the herd. Eli didn't move until the danger passed. Then he said quietly, "You can't stop the charge by being quicker. You stop it by being still enough to meet it." No one understood then, but he'd already built more than a rifle. He'd built control. And one day soon, that calm would be the only thing standing between him and death. The plains were full of men who could shoot. Some were fast, some were accurate, a few were both. But Eli noticed something none of them seemed to understand. When the target moved like it meant to kill you, everything they knew fell apart. They aimed for center mass, just like the Army manuals said. But Grizzlies didn't run straight. They weaved, dipped low, charged with shoulders forward and heads bobbing. That meant the center wasn't where it looked. And if you missed the first shot, there wasn't going to be a second. Eli had watched it happen more than once. A good man with a steady hand would draw down on a charging bear, fire when it hit 40 yards, and watch the bullet punch into muscle without stopping a thing. Then the bear would be on him before he could even work the lever. Sometimes the man lived. Most times he didn't. The survivors called it bad luck. Eli didn't believe in luck. He believed in angles. So he started building his own kind of range. Not a flat field with targets nailed to posts, he used moving things. Hung cans from tree branches so they swung in the wind. built a sled rig with a straw dummy he could pull with a horse at a dead run, practiced leading it by inches. Then he stopped shooting from a standstill and started walking as he fired, then running. Then kneeling mid-stride and firing while sliding on gravel. At night, at dusk, in the rain. Anything to simulate the moment when panic tried to steal your breath. He studied birds of prey, hawks mostly, watched how they dove, how they didn't aim at the rabbit, where it was, but where it would be. He understood something most men never learned. The kill shot isn't about where the body is, it's about where the heart will be by the time the bullet gets there. The other ranch hands thought he was losing it. Eli's building a circus act, one said. He gonna shoot bears out of the air next? Eli didn't care. He didn't want them to understand. He only wanted to make sure that the next time something came charging, his rifle wouldn't just fire, it would finish it. Then it happened again. Mid-autumn. Eli and a hired hand named Roscoe were riding fence when the air turned wrong. No birds, no breeze, just pressure. Roscoe felt it too, reined in his horse, looked around. That's when they heard the growl, deep and low, like a rock slide behind a curtain. The bear came from the tree line fast, like a shadow on fire. Roscoe froze. Eli didn't. He stepped down from his horse, took one breath, raised the rifle. The bear charged. And that's when Eli did something no one else ever dared. He didn't shoot it in the chest. He aimed for the side of the neck, just below the hinge of the jaw, where the breath started, where the spine met thought. And when he pulled the trigger, the bear didn't slow. It dropped. They crowded him that night around the fire, not in a hostile way, just curious, hungry even. Men who'd seen too much death, looking for an answer that didn't feel like chance. Roscoe told the story 10 times before the coffee had even boiled, each retelling a little more breathless than the last. Didn't even flinch, he kept saying. Didn't aim like the rest of us would have. It was like he'd already seen it happen. Eli sat with his hat low, legs crossed, eyes on the fire. One man asked what load he used. Another asked if he filed his sights different. Someone even swore he must have had some kind of new powder, something imported. Eli just stirred the coals and didn't speak. When the questions turned to frustration, he finally looked up, not angry, just tired. "There ain't no trick," he said. They didn't believe him. Men don't like mystery without magic. They wanted a formula, a method, a diagram they could follow. Eli knew better. He'd spent years breaking every habit that fear built in a man's hands. What they called a trick was just what was left after you scraped panic out of your bones. By the next day, the story had grown legs. A drifter passing through said he'd heard about a man in Kansas who could stop a cougar mid-leap with a wink and a whistle. A rancher's kid swore he saw Eli practicing with mirrors. It didn't matter that none of it was true. The silence left space for stories to grow, and Eli let them, not out of pride, but because the truth wasn't teachable. Once, a young buck from the next town over rode 2 days just to ask him for a lesson. Said he'd lost an uncle to a bear in the Bitterroots. Said he couldn't sleep until he learned the same shot Eli made. He was polite, earnest, hands still shaking as he held his hat to his chest. Eli offered him water, sat him down, and listened. Then he said, "Go hunt deer until your heartbeat stays quiet." The boy looked confused. "Then you'll teach me?" Eli shook his head. "No, that is the teaching." The boy didn't get it. Few did. Eli wasn't trying to hold secrets. He just knew that men wanted shortcuts to things that required stillness, not steps. You couldn't learn the shot if you needed to learn it fast. The kind of calm it took had to be grown slow, like grass over a grave. That winter, 3 more men came asking for lessons. Eli gave them coffee, told them stories. Sent them home with the same advice. Train until you can breathe, with something charging you. Then you'll know what to do. He wasn't hiding the trick. The trick was that there never was one. The man rode in on a mule, hatless and smiling, with a coat too thin for the wind and a Bible strapped to the side of his saddlebag. Folks called him Preacher Dawson, though no one could say what church he belonged to. He didn't carry a cross or wear a collar. He just showed up in the early spring and started helping where help was needed, fixing fence posts, mending roofs, delivering newborn calves in freezing barns. People liked him. Eli didn't talk to him for 3 weeks. It was the kind of spring that fooled men into thinking winter had gone. Cold in the mornings, warm in the afternoons, snow still clinging to the northern slopes of the hills. The bears were waking up early, lean and hungry, and everyone felt it in their bones. That was the year 2 sheep herders lost a third of their flock overnight. No one saw the attack, but the tracks told the story plain. One bear, desperate and quick. That was the same. A week the preacher finally found Eli alone out behind the barn, cleaning his rifle by lantern light. "You the man that dropped a grizzly like it was a sick dog?" Dawson asked, easing himself onto an overturned crate nearby. Eli didn't look up. "Depends who's asking. I'm not here to learn the trick," the preacher said. "I'm here to learn the reason." Eli paused. That was new. Dawson folded his hands and stared into the dark. "I've seen men shoot with steady hands. I've seen killers and cowards. But I've never seen stillness like yours. That's not skill. That's something older." Eli ran a cloth down the barrel in silence. "You lose someone?" the preacher asked, soft and without pressure. Eli nodded once. "My brother." "How long ago?" "Too long to still feel it this close." Dawson didn't speak for a while. Just let the wind fill the space between them. Then he said, "You know, Eli, grief's a strange fire. Burned wrong, it can make a man reckless. But burn it slow, and it hardens you, shapes you." Eli leaned the rifle against the fence and looked up for the first time. "It's not just grief," he said. "It's the space it left. I filled it with control, with breath, with silence. And when the bear charges," Eli smiled barely, "there's no room left for fear, only the shot." Dawson nodded like he understood something unspoken. "So it's not about killing. It's about not being taken." They sat in the dark a while longer, saying nothing more. The preacher didn't try to offer comfort or prayer. He just patted Eli on the shoulder and stood to go. "I hope you never need that shot again," Dawson said. Eli watched him disappear into the dark, mule plodding quiet against the dirt. He didn't say it out loud, but he knew better. He was going to need it again, and soon. His name was Micah. Couldn't have been more than 16, lean and dirt-faced, with hands that looked too big for the rest of him. He rode up on a borrowed horse with no saddle and a bedroll tied with fraying rope. Didn't say much at first, just stood at the edge of the corral like he wasn't sure if he was supposed to be there. Eli spotted him from the porch, rocking slow in a chair that hadn't creaked in weeks. "Looking for someone?" Eli asked without rising. Micah nodded once. "You the one who killed the grizzly last spring?" "That depends." "On what?" "On whether you're here to ask how," Eli said, "or why." Micah hesitated, then stepped forward. "My pa's dead. Grizzly got him up by the canyon ridge. They found what was left. Mama won't go near the hills no more." Eli looked the boy over. His boots were cracked, his shirt too thin for the wind. But the eyes, that's what stopped him. It wasn't fear behind them. It was the same look Eli remembered seeing in his own reflection the day after Isaac died. Not rage, not revenge, just a quiet, burning need to make sure it never happened again. "You want to learn to kill a bear?" Eli asked. "No, sir," Micah said. "I want to make sure I don't freeze when one comes for me." That was all it took. Eli didn't answer. He just stood, nodded toward the barn, and started walking. Micah followed, dragging his bedroll and never asking what came next. The first week, Eli said almost nothing. He watched the boy wake at dawn, feed the stock, scrub tack, carry water. Micah never complained, never slouched. He moved like someone who knew that stillness was something earned. At night, Eli laid out bedrolls under the open sky and gave him one rule: "You move when I move. You breathe when I breathe." By the 4th day, Micah had matched his rhythm without thinking. He sat the same way, rose at the same time, reached for the tin cup before Eli passed it. The boy was learning, not just by instruction, but by absorption. Eli took him out into the low hills, where the rabbits ran and the shadows lengthened before sundown. They didn't shoot, not yet. They just watched. Animals, wind, distance, the way the light bent around a body before it moved. One evening, as they sat on a ridge, Eli finally broke the silence. "You flinch?" Micah shook his head. "You will." He handed him the rifle. Micah cradled it gently. "That rifle don't make you strong," Eli said. "It only tells the truth about how steady your soul is when something wants you gone." Micah nodded. Eli turned toward the valley. "We start tomorrow. You're going to learn how to hold your breath while something with teeth tries to take it." Micah didn't speak. He didn't need to. He already understood. Training didn't begin with bullets. Eli wouldn't even let Micah fire a round for the first 10 days. "A gun only tells on you," he said, "and you ain't ready to hear the truth yet." Instead, they walked. Long distances across open plain and narrow draws, always in. Silence, always watching. Eli would stop suddenly, point to a ripple in the grass, and whisper, "Where's the wind coming from?" Or he'd crouch beside a dried hoofprint and ask, "How long ago?" Micah learned to read everything where the birds flew low, where the rabbits sprinted crooked. They weren't just lessons in tracking, they were about attention and how to keep the body calm when the world moved too fast. Eli had built a makeshift range out behind the barn, but it wasn't like the others in town. No paper targets, no tin cans. Just crude straw dummies mounted on sleds pulled by horses at varying speeds, rigged with tripwires and clattering pans to simulate noise and chaos. The first time Micah tried to fire, he jerked the trigger and missed by 3 feet. Eli didn't scold him, just walked up, took the rifle, and fired it himself. 1 shot. Clean. Dead center. Then he handed it back and said, "You're pulling like you're trying to kill. That's not how it works. You don't pull. You allow." It took Micah weeks to understand what that meant. At first, he gritted his teeth every time he raised the rifle. His hands would shake by the 3rd run. Eli said nothing, just kept resetting the dummies, making them move faster, closer, louder. He'd whisper reminders like prayers. Breathe, exhale, let the sight settle. Wait for the silence between heartbeats. Slowly, Micah's breathing changed. He started letting the rifle settle into his shoulder like a trusted weight, not a burden. He stopped blinking when the trigger broke. The panic in his eyes faded, replaced by something sharper, quieter. Eli also taught him when not to shoot. One afternoon, a coyote broke from the brush right past them, and Micah raised the rifle without thinking. Eli grabbed the barrel and shoved it down. "Could you make the shot?" he asked. Micah nodded. "Then don't," Eli said. "You don't need to prove it. You only shoot when silence isn't. Enough." By the 4th week, Micah was shooting on the move, kneeling in the dust, even firing from his back as the straw dummy sled thundered past him. He began to hit more often than he missed, but it wasn't the accuracy that made Eli nod one evening as they cleaned the rifles in the glow of the lantern. It was the calm. Micah no longer celebrated the shots that landed. He didn't flinch when they didn't. He simply reset, breathed, and tried again. "You're not learning to kill a bear," Eli told him one night. "You're learning how not to be prey. That's different. Prey panics. Prey forgets where it is. But the one who stands still when the ground shakes, that's the one who decides what lives." Micah said nothing. He just looked at the rifle, then at Eli, and nodded once. He was almost ready. The word came in fast, like all bad news does. A rancher's boy tore through the town on a lathered pony, shouting before his boots even hit the ground. A cattle drive had gone sideways up in the gulch, somewhere near the Twin Ridge Forks, and something big had torn through the rear flank. They'd only seen a blur at first, but when the bodies were counted, 1 steer was missing, another gutted, and a trail of blood led up into the trees. The prince said Grizzly. A big one. Maybe the biggest anyone had seen that season. The kind that didn't just take meat, it came back for more. Eli was in town when the boy arrived. Micah wasn't. By the time Eli saddled up and rode hard for the gulch, the sky was already folding in with that strange gold light that happens right before dusk when everything feels too quiet. When he got there, the men were shaken. Not panicked, just unsure. The kind of unsure that settles on a man who's seen death come close and walk away with something it wasn't supposed to. No one had eyes on Micah. He'd ridden ahead with the foreman's younger son, said he was going to look for signs, said he'd be quick, But he wasn't. Eli followed the tracks fast and hard, his heart pounding with something he hadn't felt in years. Not fear, something worse. A memory creeping into the present, the same kind of evening light, the same scent of pine and blood on the wind. Isaac's body flashing through his mind in pieces, boots, hair, an outstretched hand. When he crested the rise, the air turned cold. Too cold for the season. That's when he heard the growl. It echoed through the trees like thunder packed into a barrel. Eli kicked his horse and rounded the bend just in time to see it. The bear, massive and coiled like a spring, lurching from the brush with its eyes fixed not on Micah, but on the rancher's youngest boy, maybe 11, frozen solid in a patch of clearing with a half-empty canteen in one hand. Micah stood 10 feet away, rifle already shouldered, breathing steady. Eli saw it, then not the stance or the aim, but the stillness. That same uncanny stillness Eli had spent years teaching, the kind you can't fake. The kind that only comes when a man accepts that there's no escape, only the moment and what you do inside it. The bear charged. Micah didn't shout, didn't flinch. He let the weight of the rifle press into his shoulder, exhaled once, and squeezed. The shot rang out like it had been waiting all day for permission. The bear stumbled, let out a roar that turned into a grunt halfway through, and fell so hard the ground trembled beneath it. Dust rose, leaves scattered, and silence wrapped the woods like a shroud. Eli dismounted slowly, walked up without saying a word. Micah was already lowering the rifle, eyes wide but not shaking. The boy was safe, his breath shallow, tears in his eyes, but no scream. Just awe. Eli looked at the bear, then at Micah. The lesson was complete. They didn't speak on the ride back, not because there was nothing to say, but because what had happened didn't live in words. It lived in breath, in the weight of a trigger, before the break, in the silence that comes after a life ends and the world keeps turning anyway. Micah rode with his head low, eyes fixed on the trail ahead, and Eli rode beside him like a shadow close enough to catch him if he fell, but far enough to let him carry what he needed to. The ranch was lit up when they arrived. Men gathered near the barn, waiting with the kind of tense stillness usually reserved for funerals. When they saw the boy unharmed and the man beside him, something shifted in the air. Not celebration, not relief. Respect. No one asked what happened. They saw it in Eli's face. They saw it in Micah's hands, how he gripped the reins, not with fear, but with clarity. The kind of grip that said he'd done something few men ever do, stand still in front of death and speak with lead. Eli helped him down. The boy's mother rushed forward, wrapped her son in her arms, sobbing. Micah stepped back and let her cry, but his eyes never left Eli. Later that night, as the fire crackled low and the wind cut through the trees like a whispered warning, Micah came to the porch. He didn't knock, just stood there until Eli looked up. The rifle was in the boy's hands, held out not as a return, but as a gesture, a question. Eli took it, checked the chamber, wiped it clean with his sleeve, and handed it back. "You keep it," he said. Micah nodded. "I didn't feel anything," he admitted. Not fear, not anger, just quiet. Eli took a long sip from his tin mug and stared out into the dark. That's how you know it's real. When you stop needing the shot and just become the moment before it. Micah sat beside him, and they watched the stars come out, one by one, like memories too patient to forget. There was no talk of bears or bullets, no praise, just the stillness between them, a passing of something older than words. In the weeks that followed, folks came asking again, how'd the boy make the shot? What was the trick? Could Eli teach them, too? But this time Eli said nothing, because the answer was already walking among them, saddle-worn and rifle steady. Micah didn't boast. He didn't teach. He just rode his roots, tended cattle, mended fences, and slept with one hand always close to the stock. They said he never missed again, not because he was faster, not because he was braver, but because he understood something that few ever do. When the charge comes, you don't shoot out of fear. You breathe, you aim, and you let the stillness decide.